Alright, this time on Captain Chaos' Laboratory, we're going to be working on the Department 56 Haunted Barn. And it's sent to me because it doesn't work right, which is probably the most obvious statement there. But I was trying to pull up the email and my phone just crashed to tell you exactly what it said. The first thing I did, though, is this is a 120 volt house, meaning the light's 120 volt and this plug's 120 volt. So if you were to test it, be careful that you don't shock yourself because it will hurt you a lot. As far as it goes, the light does work, and the first thing I tested was this here to ensure that this had the 120 volt coming out of it, and it does. It's 119, but 120 plus or minus a few percent. Let's see. So as far as the piece goes, says no sound. So unfortunately on these, when there's no sound, it can be one of a couple things, and it could be anything from a bad chip to a bad connection, blown speaker. I have not plugged it in yet. The only thing I've done is made sure that the light didn't get damaged in shipping, because this is the what I call the old school, because this is the type of flicker light I grew up with, where it looks like a flame, to make sure it didn't break. Because when I got the box, it was rattling, and I'm like, uh-oh. I never like it when I get packages in the mail or post UPS, FedEx that are rattling. That usually indicates something broke. It was this thing bouncing around inside, so it was just a light bulb. But anyhow, so when this first came out, I almost wanted to get it, but it doesn't fit my motif, although it would look good in a pumpkin patch. But for those who haven't seen it, it is a porcelain house or ceramic, and there's the volume knob right there on the back, and on the bottom you have the hole for the light and then the plug for the cord, and this is where you access it. So if you look through the windows or the holes in the wall or the door, you can see the electronics in there. If you take a flashlight, you can actually see them really well through here, but that you would have to heat this up. This is glued on really good. Now these two brass looking things are rivets. They're brass rivets, are not screws. So, but let's go ahead and plug it in. I do have the power off, that's why the light's not on. And turn it on. So the pumpkin lights came on. You can see, there you go. And you can see the flicker, and then switch feels good. So I don't think it's a broken switch. But it might be something else, so just, no. It's definitely something else, it's not the switch. So let's get this thing opened up. So I'm going to start my my temperature at a lower setting for the air. I'm going to do it at 125 degrees Celsius to start. And the reason I'm going to go with a little bit lower temperature is I don't want to warp the plastic too much. But first things first, let's get that out of the way. And let's get a couple of spudgers ready. Make sure they'll fit in the seam. Yeah, they're going to fit perfect. And let's start the process. When this piece came out, I was considering it, like I was saying. I thought it would look good in my pumpkin patch until I saw the size. And I mean, most barns are bigger than houses anyway, but it was just too big for what I was looking for. But I still do like the piece. It's just, it doesn't fit in very well with what I have set up. So if you haven't seen this before, you just keep moving your heat gun so you don't warp the plastic. Since this has a thin nozzle on it, I'm just following the seam, and hopefully after a minute or two it'll get the resin loose enough to start separating. I'm not too worried about the porcelain. You can crack the porcelain if you get it too hot too fast, but 125 degrees C isn't very hot for porcelain. That's a little over, what, 230 Fahrenheit? And just keep the heat towards the seam. You don't want to heat up the whole plastic disc, because attached to the center of this plastic disc is going to be the circuitry, which should be pretty basic. It should have a transformer to step down the power from 120 volts to probably 12 or 9. And then you'll have the speaker and the blob chip and the sound chip and some basic components. And they're probably all attached to those two rivets right there in the middle. Alright, let's see if we have any movement. We do have some. So she's almost there. So the top started moving, but there's a section right in here that doesn't budge at all. The cracking you heard was just the glue. I don't like how they have this off to the side, so when you put pressure with your spudger, you have thin spots. So you gotta be really careful on prying. So you gotta feel it. If it feels tighter than it should, or you don't see any motion, don't heat it up again. Because when you have thin spots like here and here, you can actually shatter or chip the porcelain or ceramic, whatever you want to call it. There we go. Oh, we got another hard spot. Really hard spot. It does not want to come. Come on. Let's try. Well, I'm going to hold it up and see if I can force it under the heat, because this corner does not want to give. You can hear it though. With pressure, it's starting to separate. There we go. And usually on Department 56 houses are a little harder to take apart stuff like this because they use a really strong resin type glue, whereas Lemax uses a resin glue, but it's usually a little weaker bond, and also they use a lot of hot glue. One side just doesn't want to separate very well. It's trying though. Almost. There we go. Should be good now. Just gonna tip this and use a little gravity assistance to help it from re-adhering. And I got glue strings I gotta cut. They're getting cool, so the strings are cooling down. It would be a little bit of a hassle. There we go. There we go. So this thing has a really big speaker, 8 ohm, 0.5 watt, but it's a monster. Speaker wires look good. So, oh, and the transformer, this one is 120 in, 5 volts out. And I figured to be 12. I'm going to guess that we're going to have a bad circuit board. Blob chip is bulged and split. When your blob chip splits or gets bulged is usually when you lose your sound. So if you ever take one apart and your blob chip's cracked, I'll try and zoom in on this one. That's usually the end of something on your board that will never come back, and then 90% of the time it's going to be your sound that's going to fail, because your sound is usually mostly what's on the blob chip. If you have flashing lights, the blob chip can control those too, but if you have sound, that's the program for your sound. So I'm going to zoom down and then I'm going to move the house over. And then I'm going to move the wires, or try to. There we go. And get a pointy thing so I can point. So, if you look here at the blob chip right here, I'm going to bring my light down, and probably really close to being in frame. You see this right here? This, you see how the light breaks up right there? That is a split that goes all the way across that blob chip. So it stops right about here. So it's about 3/4, so I can't really say it's all the way, but that is most likely the reason there's no sound in here. So, but we're going to check the whole circuit board. We're going to pull it out and see if any of the components are exploded, because that will also potentially cause a problem, because usually if something's exploded, that means something's not working anymore. And the only real way to fix this is you can get another one as a parts house, or you can use that recorded card thing that you can play, and you have to hit play every time it stops its cycle, and that'll play the sound for when you're displaying your house, as an example. But what kind of glue they use to hold this in, and we'll take this board out. And it looks like they just use hot glue on the black pad. They use, it might come out. Is it going? Yeah. They just used a very little bit, or a light amount of adhesive. So Luckily, most companies don't use a lot of glue on their circuitry because it shouldn't move. Let's get the... Alright, so the board popped out. There is some discoloration on the board right here. This blob chip is shiny. I think it actually melted. And the other side, it's hard to do this when it's zoomed in so tight. We got transistor, which looks okay. This thing right there, next to the capacitor, this black thing. The two capacitors aren't bulged, and they don't appear to be leaking from the bottom. There's no stains around them. This right here is also a capacitor. It's a ceramic capacitor, this orange. It's not cracked. Usually when they go bad, they crack. All the resistors, I can still read the color bands, which indicates they're not burnt. There's a Zener diode in here. And then we have 4 diodes right here, these black with the silver bands right there. That's actually a rectifier. It's a full bridge rectifier. The circuitry on here and these LEDs are DC driven. So this takes the AC from this transformer and cleans it up and makes it DC. It helps with the sine wave. Because this is a 5 volt out, but it doesn't say if it's AC or DC. It's a 5 volt, 280 milliamp out, 120 volt, 60 hertz in. It's a standard transformer. You can find them in a lot of different things. It's actually very similar to the transformers that are used in the cigarette plug to convert your 12 volt car to a 5 volt for your charger on your cell phone. So technically, if this ever burned out, you could use the one that comes out of one of these. If you can't find the exact model, this is 120 volts in and it's 5 volts out. Or if you do a rapid charging, it's 9 volts. But I've done it. If you watch the Octo Swing series where I rebuilt the Octo Swing, you'll see where I've done stuff like that when the transformers die. I'm going to zoom back out to make it a little bit easier. It's hard to hold this thing in frame with the wrong direction. There we go. So I'm going to go with, we got a bad blob chip, only because the blob chip also powers it down so this string of lights can run at 4.5 volts, which is probably what one of these resistors is to power down, because the LEDs cannot run at 120. Those LEDs probably run at actually 3 volts or less. So let's plug it in, and this is where it becomes dangerous. So this is 120 volts going into this transformer. So you've got to remember that you do have hot power in here at mains voltage. So you'll be very careful. Everything on the circuit board should be at 5 volts or within 5 volts, you know, plus or minus 10%, or a little bit lower because it's going into the lights. And it should be in DC. So, but you got to be careful down here that if you screw up these red wires, you break the winding coating or covering. If you don't, give yourself a little tingly and get that Albert Einstein hairdo where your hair's sticking up, because it'll do it. So I'm going to set my meter on DC so I can see it here. And I'm going to reach over and give this thing a little juice. Click. So, flame light's on. There we go. And let's make sure we're getting good output from the transformer. So the 2 blue wires are God, I feel like a pirate, are the power. So there and there. Oh, it also helps if I turn the switch on. There you go. The power goes through the board to the switch and back to the board. So this way we can make sure we get power throughout the circuitry. That's not good. It says the transformer is only putting out 1.5 volts. That's barely enough power to make those LEDs light up. There we go. Didn't have a good connection. So we're getting 6.5 volts out of that transformer. It's a little higher than, usually most transformers are plus or minus 10%, so 5 volts would be 5.5 volts. At 6.5 volts, that's like 20 or 12 or 13%. It's kind of an out of tolerance transformer. That could have popped a blob chip and caused the leakage, because the blob chip has a buffer, and on most electronics it's usually 10%. Some of them are 6 or 3 or 1, but most of the basic hobby stuff like this is in the 10% realm. And at 6.55 volts, that's 10, 20, 22%, 21%. That's actually, no, that's closer to 25%. That's way out of range for the transformer. That might have caused the problem. Alright, let's turn this house so I can get a better look at the circuit board while we're poking around here. Alright, so black and white wire here is the lights to the pumpkins right here. And the green wires are these pumpkins here. And we have another set of each one of these pumpkins has their own wire. I'm surprised it didn't just put them all together to reduce the amount of wires going up inside this thing. But it is what it is. Alright, let's go to the next thing. So we know we're getting AC out of the transformer. Now we should be getting DC to everything else. That's the switch. So yeah. I'm going to say that was their cause, because this is starting to liquefy just from having it running right now. It's getting sticky, so that means the blob chip's getting hot. So there's still connection, which I know there is because the power is going to it. But I'm going to say the problem is the blob chip is bad due to the fact it probably got overpowered because that transformer is out of whack. It's too high of a percentage. But let's test the power at the blob chip. So let's find where the rectifier is and figure out which is AC or DC plus and minus side. So these are our two power bars here. And we are getting 6.36 volts DC. So trace the track. There's the hot for the and then where is the, so this is the negative to the blob chip and this is positive. So I got 5.62 volts going into the blob chip. I did. Apparently I lost my connection. Let's try that again. Yeah. That's a little out of 10%. It's not bad. The blob chip definitely failed though. Let me see, let me poke around some more here, some of the power. So that goes to that, which is yeah, that's the hot. I mean, I know that it said negative 5 volts is because I didn't flip the meter leads in my hand. My meter will read forwards and backwards. Some meters will not. You just have to be able to just know that the negative is because you just have the meter on the wrong side. It's totally fine. It won't hurt anything. If you're doing something like this when you're poking around, make sure that you don't arc contacts. That's how you can blow components. That's good. That 3 volts was to the lights, so we're getting good power there. That's a signal off of the blob chip. Well, that's the blob chip output for the sound, and it is 0. But it's sound. There's the smoothing capacitor. We're not getting any power. over there. Go back to reference. Here we get a good connection. We also have a solder pad that's blown up on this board. And that solder pad is... No, I still got... Oh, do we? Yeah, we don't have any... There we go. If I push hard enough, I can get a connection on the solder pad of 6 volts. And that's the... And that is the resistor for the blob chip. Yeah, this blob chip burned out. It's unfortunate. So the only thing we can do to this is make it just light up like it is, or I can see if they want to do a push button sound. I can try and find a parts house that still has a good circuit board. That's basically a house where something like this has been smashed or dropped. So the porcelain is destroyed, but the circuitry still works. Finding those are not as prevalent as just finding a replacement porcelain body, because a lot of them, they sell them cheap because this burns out, but this is still intact. Whereas finding one that this got dropped and this is still intact isn't as prevalent. So I'll do some research. I know they have a time frame, so I'm going to give them an email. But basically, if you have a house that has no sound, more often than not, and it's a high more often than not, you're going to be talking like 98% of the time, it's going to be the blob chip or the sound chip. And this has a blob chip. Lemax uses a blob chip with an amplifier or a sound amplifying chip. So when I say sound chip, it's that chip there, because it's an amplifier to take the sound and make it louder. Whereas Department 56, a lot of them have volume knobs, and this chip is basically just pumping out as much as it can and then use the volume knob to control it. Whereas Lemax, the volume knob is on the, some of them are on the building, but they're mostly on the cord, and they use an amplifier chip. In some cases that amplifier chip fails, but same with Lemax. The blob chips crack. They can crack from an overpower spike, plugging in the wrong power supply. This case, I'm going to go with this thing because it's putting out too much juice. It's outside of its 10% tolerance. It's getting warmer than I would expect for 5 volts, but it's not overheating. And that's why you have those 2 brass rivets, is to hold this weight so it doesn't break free and bounce around and destroy everything. Because this little guy here is a couple of ounces of just solid steel and copper winding, so there's a lot of metal. But open your houses if you have a sound problem. In some cases I've seen where the speaker wires have broke free, either from the board or the speaker. I've also seen it where the speaker has a hole in it or the cone has separated. So if the cone separates, this one is still intact. You'll get no sound. But more often than not, like saying, it's a blob chip, and if you use a magnifying glass or a set of magnifiers, you can take a look at it closely, or use your cell phone. You can use the magnification zoom in feature. If your blob chip is cracked, that's usually the problem. Because inside, it's not that moisture gets in there, it's the circuitry is so small. It's a micro chip. No joke, literally that term micro, for you need a microscope almost to see it. The little components, when that blob cracks, it just, the components soldered or connected, and then when it cracks, it does this. There's no more connection. I've actually taken one and slowly melted the resin to look inside, and by the time we're done melting the resin, you melt through the microscopic wires too. But basically that's what happens, is when it splits open, there's no more connection of electricity on certain parts of the circuit. This blob chip only controls the sound. So when it cracked, you lost your sound. Or in this case, this lost its sound. The light circuit comes up here, goes through the resistor right there, goes back out. These lights here come up, they go through these resistors, come back out, and that's why we have a cluster of resistors, because each one of these lights has their own resistor. They're all the same light. They could have simplified the board, made one resistor with a pigtail of 3 lights, and there would be 2 less wires and 2 less components. But there was probably a reason. The circuit board has components missing on it because there's probably a circuit board they used in different pieces at that time. So it's probably just cheaper to do it this way than to remanufacture or redesign a new circuit board. And it's no different than these wires here. They probably could have condensed them down too, but there's always reasons. As far as these two big capacitors, the one taller capacitor, this one here that I'm touching with my finger, which is the one closest to the rectifier, is a smoothing capacitor. And then this one over here is on the output of the chip, which is also a smoothing capacitor. This is in power smoothing. This is out speaker smoothing. We also have the transistor and the ceramic capacitor to help with the music, the sound, the track, whatever you want to refer to it as far as keeping the speed correct. It's acting so it's not playing it too fast or too slow. So it's a pretty basic circuit board. Everything can be replaced on the circuit board except for one vital component, and that's the blob chip, and that's pretty much the same on every single miniature house that has sound or music to it. And it's because they all use a blob chip to do their sound, and unfortunately when they go bad, there's not much you can do except replace it, or just have it as a lit house, or put in an aftermarket speaker system, one of those little MP3 circuit boards. Like I said, I've used them a couple of times. I did it on a boat. I can't remember the name of the boat. It's one of those spooky boats, the SS Spectre, I think it was. And then I've also done it on the Octo Swing. So I will message them and see what they want to do, but at this point, this inspection is done. I'm just going to kill the power, leave it, and send them an email and see what we can do to go further. Other than that, it's a nice lit barn, if you want to use it as a lit barn. If it was mine and it was a lit barn, I would basically just disconnect the power wire or cut the components to the blob chip so the blob chip doesn't keep getting hot, because that blob chip is getting really shiny because the coating is warming up pretty fast. So it's probably got a little short inside of there from it breaking. But anyhow, until the next video, or if I find a part for this one, if they want to get it fixed in their time frame, I'll see you either on the next segment of it or on the next repair. Have a good one.